So today I thought I would show you guys how I color hair using alcohol markers. I've gotten quite a few requests for hair coloring tutorials specifically, but I thought I would start with a marker tutorial first, and then I'll do a digital coloring tutorial as well, just to show how I color it in Procreate. But really the process is kind of the same, the idea is kind of the same, but obviously the main difference is we're using markers today. So I have this drawing here with most everything else finished. I did forget to color in the eyes, but we'll get there. And I did pick out some markers already. I decided to go with kind of like a lavender purplish hair color. So I have 3 colors here that I've picked out and will use, and depending on how I feel as we're working, I may add in a few more colors just for some deeper shadows. But to start, whenever I'm coloring pretty much anything, whether it's skin, hair, clothing, I usually like to have a minimum of 3 markers. This just allows for some deeper shadows and smoother shading overall, because you'll have at least 1 light color, 1 midtone, and 1 shadow color. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right in, and I'll talk you through the whole process, and hopefully I don't mess it up. So again, when it comes to digital versus traditional, my process is kind of the same with hair. I always start with the lightest color. You can start with the shadows if you know exactly where you want them to be, but I tend to start with the lightest color, and this is especially true for traditional just because sometimes when you're starting dark to light with markers, it can get a little muddy when you're coloring over the darkest color a bunch of times. So I just like to start with the lightest color because you can always build up your shadow, but you can't take it away. I mean, you can, but not as easily. So for the lightest color, I have V01, and we're basically just gonna lay it down everywhere. 1 even base coat. I'll speed us through this process to keep things short. Now, a quick tip for the base layer, you don't have to worry too much about keeping things even or coloring even all the way to the edges of your lines, just because we are going to be going over it a couple more times with the darker colors and even again with the same color, so don't stress too much about this layer. Okay, layer 1 is complete. Everything is laid down and still drying just a little bit, but we're gonna go ahead and go in with our second darkest color, our midtone. That's R11, and it is an Ohuhu marker, so I'm using a combination of Copic and Ohuhu for this drawing. They work really well together. And so the next step is kind of just taking this midtone and adding some shadows wherever I feel necessary, and kind of all over, because hair has a lot of layers, and obviously hair is made up of a bunch of individual strands of hair. And so when those kind of like sections of hair separate, there is shadow because there's a layer of hair underneath that top layer. So you're kind of seeing shadows all over the place. So that's kind of the fun thing with coloring hair, is that it's kind of just whatever feels right. You can be sure that there will be a lot of shadows around the face where the hair is kind of coming from behind the face, maybe under the bangs here and kind of towards the bottom where the hair is curling over itself. So, let's hope I don't mess this up. I kind of just start at the top and work my way. I don't have a light source set for this drawing. I really should. But we're just gonna kind of slowly add shadow. And I do make sure to have varying line weight. So I have some lines that are really skinny, some lines that are a little bit larger. And that's gonna add a little bit more visual interest to the drawing. And also it's a little bit more realistic because, you know, one thing with hair that really helps is, again, just making sure that all of your lines are a different weight. So for example, rather than just doing a bunch of straight lines like this, you kind of want to have maybe one is thick, one is thin, maybe another is thin, thick, thick, thin. That's a little bit more realistic. I don't know if that makes total sense, but for my style, that's kind of what I go for. It's a good mix. So we'll shade quite a bit more as we get closer to the face. And one thing that really helps is following the grain. So when I'm drawing the hair, I like to give myself a little bit of a guide with pencil lines. So it's very clear to me when I'm coloring that, for example, this section of hair is curling around itself, and I can see where the hair is starting to curl and then come back around. And that gives me a little bit more of a guide for when I'm coloring. So just follow that grain when you're coloring, and it makes it a little bit easier. And the nice thing about coloring the hair with the markers is that you don't really have to worry too much about blending, because we actually want these very clear, defined lines. So it's okay if they're a little sharp. Kind of just works in our favor. Okay, so that's one side kind of done. We will likely go and add more, but again, you can always add more shadow rather than take it away, so we will build it up slowly. So let's go ahead and move on to this side. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab our darkest color, and we're really gonna focus this one where we want the shadows to be. So again, mostly coming from behind the face, kind of behind the bangs, and wherever the hair is kind of curling over itself. So this is kind of the stage where you actually want to pay attention to where you're putting your shadows down. So I'm gonna start, I think, around the face, just because that is the area that I'm most confident about with the shadows. And I likely will add a fourth color in the mix, because I'm already seeing that this is not quite as dark as I would like it to be. Again, 3 colors is, in my opinion, kind of like the bare minimum that you want for shading anything, just because it gives a smoother blend, but adding more is always better if you can. Gonna be pretty stingy with the shadows that I add to the top of the hair for now. Not sure that I want a lot up there, but right underneath the bangs, we definitely want it to be darker. Maybe right around the hair part too. That is likely where you'd have a lot of shadow happening. And we're getting a little bit more light-handed with the brush strokes that we're making. So I'm making much thinner, more fine brush strokes that really kind of taper off into oblivion. Because we're really kind of adding that definition to the hair, and we're showing that this hair is not one big solid mass. It is, in fact, made of a bunch of tiny little hairs. But sometimes it's a little hard to do if your hand isn't cooperating. Alright, I may go ahead and just kind of speed through the rest of this as I take my time and just kind of lay some shadows down. Alright, so right off the bat, as I'm looking at these two sides, I like this side a lot better than I like this side. And I think that is in part due to the different sections of hair that have much thicker shadows, rather than this side where it's kind of all just a lot of the same line weight. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Like there's this really thick section of shadow, and over here it's kind of all just like the same lines over and over again. So I'm gonna kind of go in and try to fix that over here and kind of emulate what I've done over here. All right, so that was kind of an easy fix. Basically what I did is I just looked for some of the areas of shadow that were already a little bit thicker than the rest, and I just kind of added some weight to them, and that kind of evened it out, I think. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go ahead and take that mid-tone again, and I'm gonna go over some of the lighter areas and just kind of thicken and darken some of the mid-tone brush strokes that I have. So, kind of up here we'll start maybe, because this this light color here that we started with the VO1 marker, we want that to be like a small amount of hair showing, because that is the lightest tone. That is kind of not necessarily our highlight color, but we do want there to be a little bit less of it than maybe the mid-tone. And I am actually using the other tip of this marker right now. I'm gonna see how I like that for some thinner brush strokes here. Just kind of adding it kind of sparingly in some areas. Let's see, how about right here? Okay, now I think what I want to do is I'm going to grab a marker that is just a little bit darker than our shadow, and I'm just gonna add some slightly deeper shadows in the areas that really need it. All right, so I've got my darker color, and it is quite a bit darker than our darkest shadow color here. So I'm gonna be very, very light-handed with it and just add it quite sparingly right around the face. And we will go over some of this area with our darkest shadow just to kind of help blend it out a bit. Again, I really want to be careful that I'm not adding too much. Just enough to show kind of that separation of sections of hair. So I'll actually add some right under here. Ooh, that was a little much, so I'm gonna go right in with the other shadow color just to kind of blend it out a little bit. Just a little bit under here. A bit in here. And that's already helping quite a bit, I would say. Okay, now I'm just gonna very, very gently add a touch in some of these darker areas, and then we'll go back in with the darkest shadow color again. And again, if you move quickly, a color will blend out, so when in doubt, if you've added a little bit too much, just take the next lightest color and blend it out quickly, and then you shouldn't have any issue. Okay, I'm just gonna add a little bit more up here, maybe like right where the hair parts. And blend it out a bit. Okay, I'm liking that deeper shadow, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go to all of those areas that I touched up with the darkest color, and I'm gonna take V15, which was our original deep shadow color, and I'm just gonna go over those so that it blends a little bit better, so that some of those lines aren't quite as harsh. That'll look a little bit more natural. Not all of them seem to need it. I think some of them look just fine, but wherever it feels like it needs it. And you know what? I think I'm gonna go ahead and add just a little bit right there. Because we kind of have this separation of hair lifting off the main portion of hair. And this will kind of just add to that illusion. And maybe a little bit more right there. And then just kind of add some more of that shadow wherever you feel like it needs it, just to balance things out a little bit. I may even add some more of this darker color in some areas, wherever it feels necessary. So you can go ahead and leave the hair like this, or if you want to, you can go ahead and add some highlight. I don't always add highlight. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It kind of just depends. But I think for the sake of the video, I will add just a little bit of highlight. And when I'm working traditionally, I like to do that with colored pencil because typically I'm working on a toned paper, so I don't usually have a white base. And it's just nice because I can add the highlights after the fact rather than trying to account for them when I start coloring with the markers. Alright, so I'm gonna take this pencil and very lightly shade over areas that I feel like the light is bouncing off of. I'm, I guess, kind of imagining the light coming from the top or kind of above and front facing, if that makes any sense. And I'll be pretty light-handed with it, just to start. And also because I do plan on layering some white over it as well, because it's not the lightest color, but it is the lightest purple color that I have. But this is also kind of nice in case you have some areas that maybe you feel like you added a little bit too much shadow to, because the colored pencil can go over the top of it very easily and just kind of bring back a little bit of that lighter color. But that is kind of all I need, I think, for that one. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the white pencil now. And this is where we want to be very, very light-handed because this is just a plain white pencil. I don't want a whole lot of this showing. Okay, I think that's about all I'm gonna do. I really don't want to overdo it with the white pencil. It's very easy to overdo it. I'm gonna just add or blend a little bit with my colorless blender. Help soften up some of these bits. And just do a few touch-ups. Okay, so next step for me is to go over the line work here with my pen. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll come back and take a look at it. All right, I am back. I went ahead and just outlined the hair. I thickened the areas that I wanted to. I also went ahead and finished the eyes because I forgot to do those. And we are just about done. The last thing that I like to do with the hair is add just a few stray flyaway hairs. Normally I would do this in the color of the hair, but I don't have quite the right purple pencil, so I'm just gonna, in this case, do it in the outline color that I used, and I find that that tends to work in these cases. So I kind of just add them all over. Definitely in the face. Oops. This is always, I think, to me, the most satisfying part. There's just something about it. The best part about these, too, is that you really don't have to overthink it. I mean, it's everywhere, so you don't have to put it in any specific spot. And that, let's see. That just about does it, I think. That's all I'll add. And that is it. That's how I color hair with markers. Hopefully that was helpful. I hope I made sense. Sometimes I don't, sometimes I do. But basically it's the same process both traditionally and digitally for me. You just work your way from light to dark and slowly build things up. And then just add a little bit of touch-ups wherever you feel like you need it. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.